Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce two very special guests on the show. We have with us today Joshua Cohen and Justin Klee, who are the co-founders and co-CEOs of Amylyx, which is a pharmaceutical company developing therapeutics for neurodegenerative diseases like ALS. Josh and Justin co-founded Amylyx Pharmaceuticals in 2013. Josh co-invented the oral fixed-dose combination AMX35, which is being explored for the potential treatment of neurodegenerative diseases. And with a background in biomedical engineering, Josh is passionate about improving outcomes where there is a significant unmet need by pursuing research into novel drug candidates for ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases. Justin previously conducted research in neural systems in the Moore Lab at Brown University and in neurophysiology and Alzheimer's disease under Dr. Rudolph Tanzi, a founding member of Amylyx's Scientific Advisory Board at Harvard Medical School to explore new approaches to treating relentlessly progressive neurodegenerative diseases. Josh and Justin have overseen the growth of Amylyx from its start as a concept that they dreamt up in a dorm room at Brown University to a global commercial stage and publicly traded pharmaceutical company that has headquarters in the US, Canada, and the Netherlands to support Amylyx's global operations. In 2020, Josh and Justin were named to Business Insider's 30 Under 40 in Healthcare list and PM360's Elite in the Drug Researchers and Developers category, which are just some of the many awards and accolades that they've won throughout their careers thus far. Josh and Justin led the global regulatory approvals of AMX35 for the treatment of ALS in Canada, branded as Albrioza, and in the US as Relyvrio. In April, Amylyx decided to remove the drug from the US and Canadian markets based on data from a confirmatory trial. So to learn more about the latest and greatest from Amylyx, let's turn to Josh and Justin. Thank you so much to the both of you for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We're very glad to be back.
Yeah, so nice to see you back. We had Josh and Justin on the show in 2022, so it's really nice to have them back if our audiences remember. So Josh and Justin, I'd like to actually, take a step back before we get into all of the nitty gritty and talk to you more about the beginnings of Amylyx. And I know that was more than a decade ago, but we all love to hear those founder stories and how you were in a dorm room and what led you to dream up something like Amylyx while you were young undergrad students.
Sure. As you said, it's was back in 2013, and Justin and I were both at Brown University. And it was my junior year, Justin's senior year, which is around the time, in a kind of science, undergraduate education, where they start exposing you that there's this primary literature out there, that there are, frankly, millions, of papers, of, incredible, little bits of scientific work spread out there. And I think what got us initially excited was kind of the convergence of becoming aware that all of that knowledge was out there, as well as, the fact that around that time and frankly, even continuing through now, neurodegenerative diseases had been such a challenge. There had been, multiple trials that we had heard of that had, unfortunately not succeeded and otherwise. I'll say one of my professors made the comment that, has kind of stuck with me, that he said, every disease has already been cured. We just haven't read the papers. And it struck me that there is just so much knowledge, contained that, hasn't necessarily been brought to light. So the idea itself, when we think about neurodegenerative diseases, the one thing that they have in common and that basically defines a neurodegenerative disease is this abnormal death of neurons. These neurons disappearing far faster than they should. In contrast, when we look at cancer, for example, what really defines cancer is this abnormal growth. There's far too many cells, and they're getting into places that they're not supposed to get, and that's what defines cancer. And a lot of the early breakthroughs in cancer were based on killing those cells, or not allowing them to proliferate and grow. So our thought was that maybe the effective therapies in neuro may start with trying to prevent cells from dying. So we dug a lot into the pathways of neuronal death, of cell death, and tried to find any mechanisms or approaches that might be able to target that. And that it's really that work where AMX 35 came out of. And I'll say that starting as young founders, I think we had both the disadvantage and advantage of knowing very little. When we started, the disadvantage, of course, being that pharmaceuticals was a very complicated field with many expertises and a lot to learn. But the advantage being that it allowed us to be brave and not to be daunted about all the challenges that were ahead of us. So maybe I'll stop there, but maybe that gives a little picture of the early founding.
Absolutely does. Thank you so much for that. And so I'd like to ask you more about, of course, the current situation now. And you had that, I would call it a blockbuster approval for Relyvrio, Amylyx 35. And so what happened when things got to the confirmatory trial, and what led to your decision to pull it from the market?
Well, maybe backing up, probably back to last time we spoke. So we initially ran a study called Centaur. That was the first study in ALS that both showed a slowing of progression as measured by the ALS functional rating scale, which is the main scale used in ALS to measure function, as well as in a longer-term post-hoc analysis showed a survival benefit as well. So in ALS being a progressive fatal disease, this was the first time that in a single trial, a drug showed that it could slow progression and keep people alive longer. So that's what led to the FDA approval. But we, typically it takes 2 or more studies for a drug to show benefit. And we believe very strongly that when you have treatments that work, it opens up so many possibilities to learn more about the disease. So we ran an additional study called the Phoenix study, and we got those results just recently. And unfortunately, the Phoenix results did not show the same thing as Centaur. So in that study, the trial did not meet its outcome, did not show a slowing of functional progression. And so it brought up a really hard and critical question, which is, we had a successful study, we had an unsuccessful study. What do you do with those conflicting results? So we did what we always do, which is we talked with people with ALS and their families, the medical community. We engaged with regulatory authorities, and we got feedback. And I think what our conclusion and the feedback was that the benefit risk is uncertain. And so we, made the hard but important decision that we did not think it was appropriate to continue marketing the product. So we announced our intention to remove the product from the market. But for people who were on the drug, we also did not feel like it was our sort of purview to make the decision for them. If people want to choose to remain on the drug, they should. And so we used our free drug program to continue to provide access for people for free if they wish to continue. I think it was obviously surprising and sad result for the ALS community. I think it speaks to the challenges we see in going after these diseases, which are such high unmet need. But I think we'll learn a lot from Phoenix, and we'll take those lessons forward into our next development candidates for ALS. And I think we feel as strong as ever that the breakthroughs are on the horizon.
Absolutely. And this is, it also follows drugs like Aduhelm for Alzheimer's, as we've seen recently, where perhaps the pathophysiological observations or the mechanism of action of the drug may be working, but it doesn't necessarily translate into clinical benefit, or depending on what measures you use, and as you described, Justin. So, and I think that just underscores the point in terms of just how difficult it is to tackle neurodegenerative diseases. So you're working in a very difficult space. And so I commend Amylyx for the way they've approached the situation, and not all hope is lost actually with the Amylyx 35. So you are exploring and continuing to explore it in other indications, as I understand.
Yeah, so before we ever went to Centaur or Phoenix, we had done a lot of work preclinically. And what we found with these compounds, strikingly, and over, was that these compounds are effective in helping to prevent cellular death. And in particular, in doing so through pathways called ER stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. And so actually about 7 years ago, we had started working in a disease called Wolfram syndrome, which was of particular interest given that Wolfram syndrome is highly linked to ER stress and also mitochondrial dysfunction. So it made a lot of sense as a disease to go into. So we had been conducting cellular and then animal studies in that disease. We had started a trial, and actually very shortly after Phoenix, we got the first interim data from that trial, which is initial data, but shows what appears to be stabilization, or in some patients even improvement of their disease symptoms. So we're quite excited about that. We're continuing to follow it, and we'll have more data in the fall, and also talk to regulators. We also had run prior to Phoenix a small study in Alzheimer's disease. And what we found, in particular in that study, was some striking biomarker changes. We saw, probably in particular, a really striking reduction in the tau and phospho-tau proteins. And this made us think and question, we could certainly, think about moving forward in Alzheimer's, but it's quite a challenging space. Are there, diseases that are really characterized by tau? If our drug is having such a striking effect on tau, or the diseases characterized by tau we might go after? And it turns out that a disease called PSP is often considered the main tauopathy. So we initiated a study in PSP, and that should be reading out in the middle of next year. Also, one of the things we did over the last decade, maybe hearkening back to the early founding days, is we've always continued to keep a very active, review of the literature, always continued to keep a very active set of relationships with physicians and academics and everything like that. And through that process, one of the targets we had been immensely interested in was calpain-2, given its connection to axonal degeneration and cell death. We decided to use an antisense to target that. Given that antisense is highly selective, can be targeted to the CNS or the central nervous system very nicely. So that compound is hopefully advancing to clinic later this year in ALS, which will also be very excited. Coming off of the Phoenix results and everything, to continue to have that bravery to keep going forward, because patients need it. We can't give up on these diseases, even if they're challenging. That's not a reason for us to turn away or to give up.
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing, of course, in the challenges are the learnings. And I'm sure that you've gleaned a lot from Amylyx 35 and just building on that to move forward. And if it's not this, it's something else. So I think that's the way it goes. And I'm really happy to be talking to you about this because, we just hear about the successes, the highs, which you've gone through, but there are lows, and you don't hear too much about those. And so I think this is really useful and valuable for our audience and people out there who are in this space or are looking to enter the space to be able to see that what it's all about, and that it's not, things don't last forever, the highs or the lows. So the lows are here, but the highs are just on the horizon. So that this is really great insight to be getting from you both, because usually we're just here, oh yeah, you got the latest drug approval and like that's it, but you don't know what went behind that and what's coming next for it. So that's excellent.
Thank you, and it's such an important point. And I think we always try to go back to what's the purpose of the company, why are we all here, and it's to help people with really some of the hardest diseases there exist. And I think when you think about what's it like for someone with ALS every day and their family, I think you pretty quickly realize that there's a lot more work to do, and we have to just take both the successes and the failures and learn from them and keep driving forward, because that's the only way we're going to get to really dramatically changing these diseases.
Yeah, and I just add to your point, unfortunately in biotech, most of the stories are not, things ultimately working the first time or whatever.
Yeah.
Quite often it's the second time. Quite often it's, maybe it doesn't work in the first indication, but it does in the second.
But you don't hear about those stories, right? So it's usually just like, oh, you just got to this blockbuster drug, like boom, like running out of the gate. But that's usually and mostly not the case.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it leads to, as we talk to others in the space, it's really a space of resilience too. I think a lot of the companies, that have been around for a while in biotech, you almost can't point to a company that hasn't had at least one, challenge or hurdle or otherwise that, is dramatic that they had to overcome. I think that resilience comes also from knowing what's on the other side, that, by being resilient, you're helping people who are, suffering from, horrible illnesses and otherwise. I think it does lead to a space that just kind of requires that resilience to keep pushing, and even when we face hurdles or challenges or otherwise.
And what I also get the sense very strongly from the both of you and Amylyx is really the focus on the patients. And I think that if you have that as the driver, I think good things are bound to happen. So that I think our audiences will definitely get the sense of that as well. When you center and focus everything around the patient, that's very powerful. And so speaking of the challenges, what would you say is the biggest learning, or what have you better understood about ALS? And are there novel approaches that you're thinking about in terms of therapeutic development? And so what are the kinds of things that you're looking forward to for ALS specifically? And then we'll talk about some of the others that you did mention, some of the other diseases as well.
So I think we have learned and will continue to learn. I think with the Centaur trial, we made many significant advances. Some small, some big, in ALS. For example, it was the first study in the U.S. to use a central IRB in an interventional study, which allows much more rapid development. We used quite a particular inclusion criteria to try to get a more homogeneous population, and a number of other things, which I'd say now we're proud to say fairly standard in ALS trials, but weren't at the time. In the Phoenix study, we explored things like at-home measurements, so that we could get measurements not just when people are in the clinic, but when they're at home as well. I think that there's still more to learn. I mean, I think going from a study in a single country in the case of the Phoenix trial, 12 countries, 8 languages. There's, big operational lifts, and there have only been so many really significant trials like that in ALS, and I think there's a lot to learn from there. We are still collecting the survival information as well, so that'll take time to mature, but I think that'll be very important as well, given that ALS is sadly a universally fatal disease. And then I think continuing to look at, what were the differences between the Centaur trial and the Phoenix trial, and then how do we leverage those moving forward? I think one big picture thing that I think many people probably broadly in neurodegenerative diseases have talked about is how can we measure things on sort of short time scales? Because I think one of the frustrating things, especially for people living with these diseases, is how long it takes for us to really show benefit. The more we understand about these diseases, the more we can say in a short period of time, here we look like we're seeing benefit, we should go to something larger or not. And so we should pursue something different. So I think we often say that with ALS, I think with neurodegenerative diseases, in many ways from a research perspective, we're where oncology was probably 20, 25 years ago. But, and on the one hand, that might sound a little scary. On the other hand, if you think about all of the remarkable breakthroughs that have happened in oncology in the past 20, 25 years, I think that's what we're going to see in Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, Huntington's, all of these diseases. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time in these areas, and I think the breakthroughs are coming.
And how have you seen the space evolve? So you've been in the space for a bit over a decade now. So between when you first started to now, what are the things that have changed? And of course, Amylyx has greatly contributed to the space and to many of the developments. And so what have you seen change, let's say, in terms of the technologies, the understandings of the disease, and then patient advocacy, of course, as we've seen as well. So all of those factors combined, how have you seen those evolve, and where do you see things going in the future in the space of ALS and also neurodegenerative diseases in general?
Yeah, it's almost hard to describe how much it's changed. And maybe as a picture, when we were starting out, every month you would read a headline that another large pharmaceutical company had closed their neuro department. That neuro departments were basically, dropping left and right. And it made sense because, the trials were, generally not reading out. And so it wasn't a very productive area of R&D, for the companies. Nowadays, and I think it's really been spurred on by, obviously, we had an exciting development, but I think we were one of many. You have new drugs coming in Friedreich's ataxia. There have been, advances in Alzheimer's disease, Rett syndrome. We've seen things in spinal muscular atrophy, Duchenne, et cetera. I think there's been an advent that, there have been some drugs that have made it to the finish line. And I think that inspires others to believe that what they're doing, has a chance and is worth pursuing, and everything like that as well. I also think from a science perspective, we have a lot of new tools. I think we've been quite excited about, antisense, for example, which is kind of a genetic approach where you can stop the body or significantly reduce the body from producing a specific gene. You can inject those in the spinal cord too, so that they only or primarily go to, spinal regions and to the brain, but don't go to the, systemic, which can prevent, any potential side effects, systemically as well. That's been really, encouraging. I think also, genetics has advanced a lot. We now know many more of the, even rare causes of, of some of these diseases, which helps us paint better mechanistic pictures. And I think, as Justin said, measurement has been getting better as well. Not just in terms of, biomarkers, but I think biomarkers really have changed drastically. In the last 10 years, probably the most notable story is neurofilament, but there are many others, as well. But also even how we think about the clinical measures. It used to always be some sort of questionnaire. Can you walk, talk, that type of thing. We've started seeing, different ways of, recording people's gait, or having wearable sensors or otherwise. So we're starting to see an advent of much better ways to measure people. And if you can measure people much better, you can determine if a drug works much faster, more efficiently, and more effectively as well.
And just to mention too, you said advocacy, which is so critical. I think so often we go through development, and I'd say it's maybe all too easy for companies or investigators to forget that the people who are most expert in the disease are the people who live with it every day. And then probably second to that is their families. And it's so important to have them at the table in every single step of development, from early stage to clinical and beyond. And I think something that's been so inspiring is the shift in awareness and advocacy in ALS. When we started, I'd say people said, "Oh yeah, Lou Gehrig's," or maybe Tuesdays with Maury is something people would say. But then the Ice Bucket Challenge happened, thanks to Pete Frates and Pat Quinn and the Frates family, and suddenly people said, "Oh my gosh, we need to do something about it." And then came Brian Wallach and Sandra and I Am ALS and their incredible grassroots movement. And I think for people with ALS, it provided them community and a way to actually share their expertise and to share their voice. And I think for the broader world, it raised the awareness of just how challenging these diseases are, that ALS can happen to anyone, and that we need to do something about it. So it has been, thanks to, so many inspiring people, that we're in a dramatically different place with ALS than we were even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, and why I think we're going to have such successful treatments and breakthroughs in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely is a multifaceted effort, I would say for sure, with different stakeholders at the table, which we're seeing more and more of than, let's say, in the past. I think people are recognizing the importance of having all of these stakeholders, including patients themselves, at the table. So that's really great to see in the drug development landscape currently, and hopefully we'll see more and more of that in the future. And
I'll maybe share one anecdote if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Think about and smile. So we were at a conference. We still go to this conference that goes across a range of neuromuscular diseases, and we've gone every year for many years now. And I'll say that it used to be very small. There weren't many of us at the conference. In fact, they would switch whether the topics were clinical or scientific, because they thought, well, there's only so much to update on. So every other year, it would switch topics. And it was sort of a small community of us going after these different diseases. We now look back, and over the past 7-8 years, we went from basically nothing to approved treatments for spinal muscular atrophy, approved treatments for Duchenne, approved treatments for Friedreich's ataxia, for other muscular dystrophies, for ALS, on and on. So we went from these sort of series of diseases that people said, I don't think I've even heard of those, I can't even pronounce them, to now we have approved treatments across all these fields. So it's such an exciting time, and I think it's just going to continue.
And I know that you mentioned a bit about your developmental pipeline at Amylyx, and so what more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we're so excited. We think that we're right at the time in these disease areas where we understand the biology better than ever before, and now it's about targeting them and bringing them to patients. So I'd say first, our antisense oligonucleotide against calpain-2, as Josh was mentioning, I think we're really excited about. Calpain-2 has been studied for decades as a key effector of axon degeneration, which is implicated in an enormous number of diseases. But the challenge has been, how do you target just calpain-2? Because there's calpain-1 and 3 and 5 and others. And so you want to just target calpain-2, and you want to be able to get it into the brain. So an intrathecally delivered antisense oligonucleotide allows you to target specifically calpain-2 and know that you're getting it in the central nervous system. So we're really excited. We're going to have that in clinic for ALS later this year. And then we think it has great rationale in other diseases as well. We have a number of early stage programs as well that we're working on, both with small molecule approaches as well as with antisense oligonucleotides. And we have AMX35, as Josh was saying, in 2 additional programs, one in Wolfram syndrome, which is a monogenic disease that is the loss of function gene causes ER stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. So it's a great match to the mechanism of AMX35 to the mechanism of disease. We're already seeing very encouraging results in that study, and that's a really tough unmet need. So we're very, very excited about that. We've been working on that for 7 years. And then progressive supranuclear palsy, which is another just really hard neurodegenerative disease. In a prior trial, the drug showed very significant lowering of the key biomarker in PSP, which is tau. And now we're taking that forward into a much larger study. And we have great hopes there because sadly, there's nothing approved for the treatment of PSP. Although obviously it's always a bit of a winding road in drug development, particularly in areas like neurodegenerative disease, we're so excited about the potential here and the potential to help so many people, and also what our colleagues are doing across the industry.
And I just wanted to ask you a bit more about biomarkers, because that seems to be, a mainstay or like somewhat of a holy grail that is pursued, especially in this space, in neurodegenerative diseases. And I think, it started with Alzheimer's and tau and beta amyloid. How important do you think those biomarkers are? Or it seems to me that it's almost a hyper focus, and maybe I want to get your perspective, since obviously you're in this space. Is that, in your opinion, where all of the focus should be? And I think you mentioned it, that it's only a part of the story, of course. And so has the space kind of had a narrow focus just on biomarkers? And do you think it should maybe be stepping away from that and including other elements? And so what is your take basically on the biomarker angle, I would say, in a lot of these diseases? And should they be pursued as strongly as they have been?
Yeah, I'd say first, maybe at a high level, having a really good biomarker makes drug development so much more efficient. If you can, in small trials, use biomarkers to ensure you have the right dose, to ensure, to give yourself confidence that you're, on the right track. That's so helpful. On the other hand, at the end of the day, what really matters is, are you making patients better? And so I think the biomarkers are kind of intermediate. They give you confidence. They give you, they encourage you to take a drug development program to the next level or otherwise. But they in and of themselves, the drug still has to work. So they in and of themselves don't necessarily change that. I'd say it's been exciting to also watch the growth, of the biomarker space. For example, I think neurofilament's the one that's gotten the most press, the most airtime, and I think neurofilament is an exciting biomarker, but it's not the only biomarker. biomarker. There are other biomarkers that are, coming forward, whether it's for neuroinflammation, other processes of neurodegeneration, et cetera. We have in Parkinson's the RT quick assays for alpha-synuclein and otherwise. We're seeing those come out for tau and PSP too. So I think it's really exciting to see some of these gaining ground and gaining traction, and moving forward. So I do think it's a really exciting space. All that being said, I do think that biomarkers in and of themselves, won't cure these diseases. It's drugs, and it's drugs that change the clinical course that will. So I think it's important as the fields focus on, is there a biomarker that allows us to measure early or otherwise, that we don't lose sight of the fact that in the end, what patients want is not for levels of some protein to go up or down. They want to walk better or talk better or breathe better or otherwise.
And I would just add that we tend to try to look to fields that have been very successful in the past and learn from those. So you look at cardiovascular disease or oncology or a number of other, probably HIV/AIDS, a number of disease areas. And I think it's really important that we learn from them. How did they advance? How did they use biomarkers to advance treatments? And I think the overall picture, just echoing Josh, is that it's not one size fits all. It's not that you find a marker and therefore it equals the disease. It tells you something about the disease. It tells you something about the progression. It tells you about subsets within the disease. It maybe tells you where a drug will be effective and where it won't be effective. So I think that what we find so exciting about biomarkers is what it tells us about the disease, because then we can treat it better. So I think that's what's so exciting. It tells us we're learning much more about these diseases. But I think where sometimes people can get a little too ambitious is when they equate a single biomarker with the disease. And I think, look, the human body is complex, and these are complex diseases. So I think, but I think the more we have these sorts of markers and we use them to teach us, I think that's where we're really going to have the dramatic successes.
And so what can we expect from Amylyx in the coming months and the years? What sort of, what kinds of things? I know that you have a lot in your developmental pipeline looking at 3 different indications. And so what are you excited about moving forward? And what can we expect to see in terms of milestones?
Yeah, it's going to be quite busy. So we expect this fall both to have further insights from from regulators and otherwise in Wolfram as to what the next steps will be, and also further data. At that point, all of the participants will have passed their week 24 visit, and we'll be able to report data, clinical data on them. The PSP trial is ongoing. We expect to report data from that in the middle of next year. And then we're hoping to bring our antisense oligonucleotide to clinic in ALS before the end of this year. So hopefully the first person ever will receive that, treatment. And then we hope over the course of next year to start getting some initial data, from that treatment as well. So those I think are the main things, the main focuses. And probably for us, the main, what gets us so excited is we think each of these has such a great opportunity, to advance, care treatment for patients. And, having 3 such things going at the same time is very exciting.
And I think you hear it from us through and through, but our commitment to ALS, our commitment to ending ALS, our commitment to ending neurodegenerative diseases, our commitment to continue to innovate is unwavering. And, I think we feel so strongly people need our help, and we're going to keep pushing. And we're so excited about what we have, and we're not going to stop until we see these diseases cured.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the work that you do at Amylyx and in giving so much hope to patients. And I know that I've been seeing press releases from ALS foundations, and they're still very much behind Amylyx, and it's so heartening to see that. And it's so exciting to see Amylyx is one of the leaders in this space for ALS and for other neurodegenerative diseases. So your name is definitely top of mind and on top there, and I'm sure will continue to be there. So as a very important leader in the field. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having us, and we'll look forward to the updates next time we catch up.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. It was a pleasure, Josh and Justin. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you.
All right, that's the end of this episode for the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.